it's time to sit back and relax with your favorite drink. And listen. Spending Christmas with friends brings warmth to the festive season, creating a sense of camaraderie and shared joy. Shared laughter and cherished traditions foster a unique bond, turning the holiday into a memorable celebration of friendship. From exchanging thoughtful gifts to enjoying festive meals together, the presence of friends amplifies the spirit of togetherness, making Christmas a heartwarming and joyous occasion. In the company of friends, the holiday becomes more than just a season. It transforms into a time of shared memories, meaningful connections, and the joy of celebrating the magic of Christmas together. And that's why I've brought along a bunch of my good narration friends to make a special Christmas treat for all of you. So, here I am in some of the stories, but others will feature some different narrators. We're here to bring some of that special Christmas cheer to each and every one of you, and thank you for listening over the course of the last year. Now, without further ado, here's our opening story. I met the real Count Chocula. I'll never work with that bastard General Mills again, by Jordan Grupe. Featuring myself, Musey's Modern Dreadfuls, and Jordan Grupe.
This is probably going to come as a shock to most of you, but here goes. Count Chocula is a real person. Actually, a real vampire, if you want to get specific about it. We met in the 70s. I was his advertising campaign manager. Unlike most vampires who stayed in Transylvania due to monarchistic duties, he chose to reside in Belgium, where better chocolate could be found, although he visited France and Germany frequently as well. He was a connoisseur of the stuff. Chocolate, that is. But he also enjoyed a glass of blood with dinner, and a nightcap at bedtime. For the antioxidants, he told me once. It was on one of those frequent trips to France that he met a representative from a cereal company looking for a new mascot, General Mills. There's nothing quite like working with a vampire, and Count Chocula was no exception. I met him at the General Mills head office where the head marketing manager was holding a meeting. I came in as an outside consultant, but I was soon hired on full-time.
Mr. James, I want you to meet our newest asset. This is Count Chocula the Fourth,
Miss Scottson said, gesturing to a man in brown and purple robes. It was the 70s, so of course he had massive sideburns and what would be considered today to be a ridiculous updo. Split right down the middle like Shemp, and then drawn upward into spikes which looked like brown horns made of hair. I shook hands with the tall, strange-looking man. He had two very large, sharpened buck teeth, which gleamed white in the bright light of the conference room.
I love what you did with the Frosted Cornflakes campaign,
said the Count.
That tiger gets me every time.
His belly laugh sounded very vampiric. But other than that, he looked like your friendly, run-of-the-mill mascot. Not the cartoon, of course. That creation was simply styled after his look.
So, here's what we're thinking, James,
Miss Scottson said, pointing to a presentation board.
Count Chocula cereal. They're chock full of cinnamon.
She looked excited and paused for my response. Count Chocula waited with a big smile on his face for my approval.
Nobody is doing cinnamon. Nobody. We'd be the first ones with a cinnamon-based cereal. Big clumps of it that are crunchy at first, but they dissolve in the milk and get deliciously soggy. What do you think, Mr. James? Is that a winner or what?
I tried not to burst their bubble too badly, but the idea stank. It was right there in front of them. How could they not see it? Tell them the catchphrase, someone said from across the table, sensing my reticence.
I want to cinnamon your blood,
the Count said enthusiastically. Everyone grinned wide and looked at me with expectant eyes. Did you guys ever consider Count Chocula being made with chocolate? Everyone's jaws dropped. Spontaneous applause broke out, and I was lifted up on several people's shoulders as they sang songs of my great idea, carrying me on a chair around the office, being careful not to be too specific in the lyrics of their impromptu celebratory songs, since spies from Kellogg's could be anywhere. There were suspected moles in the office.
Brilliant idea, Mr. James,
said Count Chocula afterwards, clapping me on the back.
I want this man in charge of all advertising for my brand. He's my guy, understand, Miss Scottson?
The manager grudgingly agreed. I didn't come cheap after all, and the three of us shook on the deal. It was the beginning of a strange partnership, and an even stranger friendship. The start of the 70s was upon us, and we began things off with a bang. Regulations were loose back then, and it showed in the ingredients. Or rather, it didn't show. Frankenberry's run in with the law for using a banned, indigestible pigment resulting in Frankenberry stool, pink-colored poop for the layperson, wouldn't happen for a few more years, and we were all living the good life, riding high on a wave of profits. The FDA had bigger fish to fry, at least for the time being. As sales of our sugar and cocoa-laden cereal began to skyrocket, I was touted as a king of the cereal advertising industry. Our chocolate cereal idea was the envy of every other brand. The Count was happy to stay hidden in the shadows and collect his cash, people believing he was just what he claimed to be, a lovable cartoon mascot. Nobody knew the darkest truths yet. Not even me. We were doing great at the beginning, with wealth and power that few people could dream of. I used to keep boxes of cash in my closets, my cupboards, all over my house. I didn't trust the banks. I still don't. Not after what they did to George Young. We had women, cars, yachts, you name it. We'd hit a chocolate gold mine. Kids just weren't used to that level of sugar in their cereals back in those days. In order to get even close to the taste they wanted, kids had to heap it on themselves by the tablespoon. And parents didn't like to look at that. Not one bit. Not with the price of sugar as high as it was. But what they didn't see didn't hurt them. A market was out there sitting wide open for a cheap, sweet, somewhat digestible breakfast cereal. So we pumped those toasted oats full of sugar, fat, dye, and cocoa powder, and set them loose on society. With all that money came power and freedoms we never could have imagined. All of us pretended not to know what the Count did with his share of the cash. But sooner or later we all knew. We all found out one by one in our own ways. I discovered the truth when he invited me to his castle in Belgium one summer. It was 73, I think, and we were riding high still, with nothing but hopes and big plans for the future on the horizon. But I didn't realize the Count had different aspirations. Darker and much grander plans than simply cereal production. His castle was located on a mountainous pass, and was very difficult to reach. I rented a car, and it barely made it up the steep slopes. Everyone in town seemed terrified when I told them where I was headed, and they all said to be careful. I was told there were rumors of a great monster that lived in the mountains, a huge winged beast. A storm was brewing when I arrived, a black cloud coming in over the mountains to my right as I pulled up to the giant castle. I hurried quickly up the front steps, feeling as if there were eyes upon me, watching me from above. There was a large brass knocker on the huge wooden doors at the front of the house, wrought iron and shaped in the face of a sharp-toothed bat. I used it to knock, and the door swung open by itself. "Count?" I called out, walking into the dusty castle foyer. There seemed to be nobody home, and yet I still couldn't help but feel as if I was being watched.
Ah, Mr. James, a pleasure to see you here.
The Count was suddenly behind me, although I hadn't seen him on the stairs outside. All I'd heard was a flap and flutter behind me like a giant pair of wings. "Whoa, you surprised me. Good to see you, Count. How you been?"
Excellent. I've finally gotten everything I've ever wanted. All thanks to you.
He closed the door behind him, and I realized I was cornered. His face no longer looked friendly. In fact, he looked quite upset. "Everything okay, Count? You don't look like yourself." He dropped his cape to the stone floor and unfurled a set of massive bat wings. They were ragged and torn, sewn together with scraps of flesh. I saw the remnants of human bodies sewn together with crude stitches, faces mid-scream, There were nipples and stretch lines and all the imperfections of the random, unfortunate souls he had chosen to piece together to make his masterpieces. His fully functional bat wings. Holy shit, Count! Some people buy a private jet. I guess you took it a step further. How much did you pay for those things? I saw blood was dripping down his chin and onto his brown suit. He didn't answer me. Oh no. Have you been blood binging again? You know how you get when you're like this. All grabby and bitey. I don't like it when you're like this. Can I go? His eyes blazed red with sudden fire.
You are the one spying for Kellogg's. I got the call this morning from our man over there. He said it's for sure. You're the man on the inside.
My heart began to pound with fear as he stepped towards me. His massive bat wings blocked out the light and he looked tall and menacing, his sharp buck teeth dripping freshly consumed blood. Me? Never!
You lie. They said you've been feeding them secrets all year.
They're just trying to drive a wedge between us. I came up with the idea of putting the chocolate in Count Chocula, remember? If it wasn't for me, you'd be nothing. Cinnamon clumps that get soggy. That was your idea. Nobody wants to eat that. Nobody wants to eat cinnamon cereal. I realized I was making things worse, and I quickly shut up. His gaze darkened, and he lunged at me like a wild animal, his wings drawn back as he closed the distance between us in an instant. He grabbed me by the neck and began to choke me, squeezing my trachea between his fingers with so much force I could barely speak for weeks afterwards. It wasn't me, I managed to squeak. You can't kill me. I made you what you are. My hands were in his face, trying to push him away, and he suddenly recoiled, dropping me.
What is on your hands? They taste terrible.
Oh, there was pasta on the plane. Garlic bread, too. Lots of garlic in all of it. I exhaled a stink bomb of garlic breath in his face, and he backed away even further. I'd also stuck 2 of the garlic breadsticks in my pocket, and I took them out and made an impromptu cross with them.
Don't do this to me, Mr. James. We're partners.
Not anymore, I said, tossing one of the cold breadsticks at his forehead and burning him badly with it. He crumpled to the floor as I raced past him and unlocked the door, leaving as quickly as I could. I got back to my car and drove out of there as fast as possible. A shadow seemed to follow me as I raced down the steep mountain roads, blocking out the light of the moon. A huge bird, it looked like. But I knew it was something much worse. Without a single stop along the way, I made it to the airport and left my rental car just outside the front entrance of the hangar, not caring if it got towed. I got on the phone with General Mills as soon as I got back stateside. I'll never work with that blood-sucking son of a bitch again, I told him. I'll keep my agreed-upon percentages and stay as a silent partner from now on. You guys are on your own with that lunatic. We're sorry to lose you, said the General. But he didn't argue. My mind was made up. He relieved me of my duties, and I went on to other jobs and other opportunities. 10 years later, a new CEO was in charge, and I pitched him an idea that he absolutely loved. Cinnamon Toast Crunch. You're welcome.
Our second story this evening is Do You Want to Build an Evil Snowman? Again, by Jordan Grupe, featuring the vocal talents of James Not Jack and Mia Mina.
Hey, want to go outside for a bit? We've been cramped up in here all year, it feels like. My wife looked up from her phone. She'd been browsing Reddit, and I saw her eyes were bleary and confused.
Huh?
You know, outside, the place we used to go that's not here.
Oh, right.
She looked back down at her phone. Come on, I'm seriously so bored. Let's go tobogganing or, let's make a snowman.
What are you, 10 years old or something?
She looked up at me, smiling now. Yes, I'm a child in a man's body. You know this. Now, can we please get out of here and go do something?
I'm not feeling up to it. You go ahead.
I sighed and was about to resign myself to staying indoors, but then decided against it. What the hell, I figured. I'll go out by myself and make a snowman just like I did when I was a kid. So I went out to the front lawn and did just that. I began by making a snowball. Then I rolled it around the packing snow and watched as it got larger. I pushed it towards the center of the yard, rounded off the rough edges, and set to work on the next big snowball that would be its midsection. By the time I finished that one, I was nearly out of snow. We hadn't gotten much yet, and it had depleted quickly. I looked around and saw there wasn't enough to make a head for my snowman. We had a very small yard. The houses were packed tightly together, and space was at a premium in this neighborhood. Glancing across the street, I saw my neighbor still had plenty of snow. The old man who lived there, Mr. Verduin, was a tall, thin, severe-looking man with black hair that never seemed to gray despite his advanced age. He liked to dress in all black clothing and drove a giant vintage Mercedes, also black. He had a reputation in the neighborhood as well, and since we had only moved in recently, I barely heard the gist of it. I hoped he wouldn't notice me stealing a bit of his snow. He hated people coming onto his property, had signs everywhere saying, "No trespassing, no solicitors, and no visitors, even." What an old grouch, I thought, telling myself I really shouldn't. But I did. I walked across the street hesitantly and stepped onto his lawn. For a second, I felt like sirens were about to go off. Police were going to pull up with lights flashing to arrest me. That's how scary this guy was to me. To all of us. The whole neighborhood was terrified of him due to multiple incidents over the years. But then, nothing happened. I felt a bit foolish standing there on his snow-covered lawn looking scared. It was fine. He was just a grumpy old man. Rumors about him were just that. Rumors. Kneeling down, I started to make a new snowball. This would be the head of my masterpiece. I made it smooth and perfectly spherical. Holding it in my hands, the big basketball-sized snowball felt heavy and just right. Part of me desperately wanted to throw it at a car. Mr. Verduin's car, specifically. He had run over my cat with that giant gas guzzler barely 6 weeks before. I was about to turn around and walk back across the street when I saw Mr. Verduin watching me from his front door. The old goat had crept out silently and had been glaring at me from his doorway. He was standing there with his arms crossed and a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Oh, hey, Mr. Verduin. Sorry, this probably sounds dumb, but I was making a snowman and..." "You ran out of snow?" He seemed amused by my discomfort, basking in it. "Right." I caught myself shuffling back and forth on my feet like a kid caught with his hand in the cookie jar before dinner. "Do you mind?" The whole situation was exceedingly awkward. The man hated people coming onto his property, loathed it. What had I been thinking? To my surprise, though, he just looked at me, baring his teeth. He didn't appear happy when he smiled. It was a hateful grin. "Wait there." I worried for a moment he was going to get his camera or something for proof to press charges, but the whole idea seemed ludicrous. Still, I took a step back and stood on the street, glancing again at the no trespassing sign I had brazenly ignored. "Ah, here we are." he said as he came out of the house with a black hat in hand. I saw he was wearing his long winter coat and a pair of boots, of course, all jet black. He surprised me by walking out of the house and straight up to me. The hat in his hand was weathered and faded, starting to turn gray almost. It had a smell also, like week-old roadkill. "Frosty needs a hat," he said. His voice was as cold as the snow in my hands, which was turning them number by the second. He reached out to me. "May I?" He took the big snowball as if to examine it and casually handed me the black fedora he was holding. I felt a surge of revulsion the second I touched the thing. I wanted to get it away from me as quickly as possible. Mr. Verduen granted my wish and offered the blank snowman head for me to place it on top of. He grinned at me, and this time I could see all of his yellow teeth, ranging in color from a nicotine-stained yellow-brown to almost black in places. "Have fun." He chuckled and turned to go back inside, easing the big wooden door slowly closed. His eye watched me from the crack of the door, staring at me until the space disappeared and it was shut. The whole thing was highly disturbing. Suddenly, the big snowball in my hand seemed to tip over of its own volition. I caught it at the last second, stopping it from falling into the road. The blank-faced snowman head stared up at me, fedora resting on top. Without knowing why, I felt a momentary sickness and despair, an utter unpleasantness, as if I was holding a severed head in my hands instead of a big snowball. I tried to shake off that feeling and walked back across the street to my own yard, looking back over my shoulder as I did. Mr. Verduen was still watching me from his front window. Unsettled, I quickly placed the head of the snowman atop its body and stood back to look at it. "Not complete," a new voice in my mind said. It needed something. Several somethings, actually. I went inside and fetched a few items from the house. A carrot for the nose, classic. A piece of red licorice for the mouth, and a couple of marbles for eyes nearly completed the effect. But no, it still needed more. I found a couple of hefty branches that had fallen from a tree during the last storm and stuck them into the torso on either side. Perfect, I thought. I stood back again to look and saw that the illusion was complete. The glassy reflections of the marble eyes looked almost human. The bright red licorice mouth gave it a slightly more unsettling smile than I had anticipated. But the hat was the kicker. I didn't like it, but it certainly completed the look of him. I looked over my shoulder again, but Mr. Verduen was gone, no longer watching me. Sufficiently cold and feeling unsettled for reasons I couldn't explain, I decided to go back inside.
Have fun making your snowman?
Christine asked from the kitchen, where she had started to make dinner. "Oh, what are we having?" I asked, ignoring the question. The fact was, the entire thing had turned sour once Mr. Verduen had decided to get involved.
Pasta with mushrooms. We needed to use up those ones from the bottom of the fridge. They were starting to go bad.
Nice. My favorite. Slightly expired mushroom pasta.
Hey, if it tastes disgusting, we'll go get chicken nuggets or something, but we can't keep wasting food.
I know, it's true. That night after dinner, which actually tasted pretty good, my wife was looking out the front window.
Why did you make it facing the house?
What?
The snowman. It's like it's looking at us in here. Why'd you do that? Shouldn't it be looking at the street?
I approached the window and looked out through the glare and the reflection shining back at me from the lights inside the house. I squinted to see the snowman I'd made was looking right back at me. His marble eyes looking very human in the dull light of the moon. How? I stood there trying to make sense of it.
What? Why are you looking at it like that?
For whatever reason I can't explain, I kept it to myself. I figured it was just kids playing a prank. But what kind of prank was that? No reason. It's nothing. I lied. I saw snow falling in the glow of the streetlights and noticed it beginning to accumulate on the lawn. Later that night, while I slept, I had a terrible nightmare. I was standing in front of a giant wall made of ice. My reflection looked back at me in it like a mirror, only bluer. The feeling I had was one of anxiety, as if someone was going to sneak up behind me and grab my shoulder at any second. But there was no one behind me in the vast reflective surface of the ice wall in my dream. Or so I thought. A tree branch suddenly popped out from one side, then on the other. As if by magic, the snowman I had made rose up behind me, materializing from thin air. He loomed large over me and wrapped his tree branch arms around me in an embrace, his red licorice mouth opening up to reveal a mouth that stretched wider and wider as I watched. The twig ends of the tree branch arms began to grow and stretch across my skin like ivy on a building. They began to poke into my skin, and I felt them puncture and go inside, reaching for my heart and wrapping themselves around it. My breathing sped up, and my heartbeat quickened with fear as the branches continued to cover my body, going into my mouth and encapsulating my face. Once I was covered in the hateful growth, the snowman stepped forward, and the freezing cold of him began to envelop me. In my dream, I closed my eyes from the terror of it all and opened them again to see myself as normal. Only my eyes were marbles, my nose a carrot, and my mouth a piece of red licorice. I tried to scream, but I found I couldn't. I woke up covered in cold sweat, or so I thought. Stepping out of the bed, I found a puddle of ice-cold water on the ground beside where I slept. I couldn't make any sense of it. Maybe I'd been sleepwalking and poured water on the floor? That was the only rational explanation I could suggest. I went out of the bedroom and got towels to mop up the water from the linen cabinet. Christine had already left for work, I realized. She'd been working extra hours leading up to Christmas, but it was earlier than usual for her to go in for her shift. After cleaning up the water, I went into the kitchen and made a coffee, then looked outside as I took a sip. I nearly spit it out in surprise. The snowman was gone. Just gone. Almost like he'd walked away during the night. Any tracks had been covered by the freshly fallen snow. My first thought was Mr. Verduin. He was behind this somehow. It wasn't kids playing pranks. It was him. The dream occurred to me again, and that voice in my mind spoke up. The snowman isn't missing. You're the snowman now. Don't you feel it? The ice in your veins? As I looked at the spot where the snowman should have been, I noticed something. Mr. Verduin across the way staring out his window at me. A steaming mug of something was in his hand, and he was staring at me intently. Then, I saw the car was still in the driveway. "Christine, are you here?" I called out, knowing that she wouldn't be. "Christine?" And then I felt it, resting atop my head. The black felt fedora, as if it had been there all along, but it was such a part of me that I hadn't paid attention to it. The thing suddenly felt like it was an extension of my body, another limb like an arm, but on top of my head. The revulsion I had felt before at the feel of it flared up again, 1,000 times worse, and I reached up to pull it off of me. It wouldn't come off. I ran to the bathroom to look in the mirror and saw what looked like veins growing down the side of my now pale face from the fedora. No, not veins. Branches. They dove down into my skin at places, and blood seeped from those spots, dripping black and running down my neck, ice cold. Screaming, I tried to rip it off my head, but I found it wouldn't come off. Pulling on it hurt worse than anything I had ever felt before. White lights shooting before my eyes each time I tried, getting more painful with each attempt. In my mind's eye, I saw it again. The dream I had the night before, looking at my own face in the reflection of ice. My eyes were glass marbles staring back at me. I breathed out, and my breath plumbed into the air as if I was outside on a February day, despite the heat of the furnace. It's going to be a very cold winter, and I'm not looking forward to the spring.
Today's third fantastic offering is It Wasn't a Reindeer by Michael Paige. This features the vocal talents of the Savage Patch Kid and McKyleVA.
Christ, I muttered to myself as the first flakes of snow started to fall. They gathered in fuzzy clumps over the windshield before my wipers cleared them away. I've been waiting for 20 minutes now in my sister's driveway. Had I chosen to wait inside with her, I'd have been a dead man by now thanks to her 2 great cats. Cute little devils, but murder to my sinuses. Puffy eyes and clogged up throat. That's just what I needed. Every Christmas, our family made the annual trip to my grandparents' cabin tucked away in the woods of Hope, Alaska, and I hoped to beat the heavy snowfall that was forecasted. Since my sister's license was suspended from a DUI, here I was, a hostage to time, with my finger tapping anxiously on the steering wheel. When my mother had asked me to be the one to grab my sister, I had honestly dreaded it from the start. It wasn't that we hated one another, we just weren't close anymore. After decades of constant arguments and bitter disagreements, we became distant and our relationship fizzled. Yes, we were siblings, but it felt more accurate to call us the residue of what siblings once were. Finally, like the gates of Valhalla, her front door opened and out she came. Her hair was forest green. The last time I'd seen her, it was white. The time before that, it was violet. "Got everything?" I asked as she clambered her way into the passenger seat.
"Mm-hmm,"
she responded as she adjusted her glasses and stuffed a few bags in the back seat. And just like that, we were off. Hope was about a 30-minute drive, and it didn't take long for the awkward silence to inflate between us. It didn't help that the radio didn't work in my car and that the broken auxiliary port made your music sound like it was having a seizure. By the time we reached the turnoff for Hope Highway, the road was turning into a thick white sheet. Thankfully, on Christmas Eve night, the long stretch to Hope's small community was quick and vacant. The cabin was tucked away in a fortress of trees 5 miles off the main road. As I made the turn, my sister cracked the window, pulled out a blunt, and lit it with her lighter.
"Want a hit?"
she asked. Snow crunched beneath us. "Not while I'm driving."
"It's a straight path. We're practically there already."
She took a drag and blew it out the window. I just want to focus on this, alright? She huffed and pushed up her glasses.
If you're that worried, maybe slow down a bit then.
There was the jab. A piece of bait to lure me into another fight. But I wasn't going to bite. Not this time. She could live with us getting there faster. The drive was almost over, and soon I'd be in a warm living room with my feet up, a spiked eggnog in my hand and Bobby Helms' Jingle Bell Rock in the air. I could already hear Uncle Jed spouting off one of his crude jokes. Why does Santa Claus have such a big—
Dude!
My sister shrieked, jabbing a finger into my side and whipping my mind back to the windshield. The car had just finished winding around the thick trail. The large body of a reindeer stood in our path, eyes wide and blank. It didn't move as the high beams found it. Snapped into a panic, I twisted the wheels into a desperate swerve. The car veered greasily to the side in a fine spray of slush. The reindeer, also known as a caribou, remained still even as the bumpers soared inches from its nose. We came to a crunching halt off the main path. Jesus, I sighed, blessed with relief. Did we hit it?
No.
My sister said, leaning out of the window to check while exhaling another plume of smoke. I wound the steering wheel back around and pressed on the gas. The wheels shrilled in place, kicking up globs of sleep but not moving an inch. Perfect, I moaned and unfolded myself from the seat to check it out. The two front tires were caked in black slush and practically swallowed in a mound of snow. I kicked at it, trying to clear off the icy debris from the treads beneath the wheel well. When that tired me out, I resorted to scraping it off with my fingers.
Screw off, Prancer.
I heard my sister call towards the dark silhouette of the reindeer, its antlers like gnarled fingers reaching for the treetops. Then she made a sort of startled yip, followed by a what the fuck? I looked up from the scrim of snow. The reindeer was now standing tall on both of its hind legs. It looked strange, like a silly caricature you'd see in a kid's book. But out there, in the silence of the woods, it was a creepy image. The way its vague shape stood on just two legs held an almost human-like balance. For whatever reason, I realized then it didn't have a tail. Its muscular neck craned to the side and let out a ululating scream, a miserable squeal of metal grinding against metal. My legs were ice sculptures, cementing me to the spot as the shriek quieted to a succession of wet grunts. The reindeer dropped to its original posture and stomped heavily. Puffs of white vapor and strings of snot vented from its nostrils. I was no hunter, but it didn't take a lot to tell when a pissed-off animal was about to charge. I leaped for the driver's seat, pulled the door open and slammed it shut just as the muffled thud of hooves reached me. Antlers scraped the door and its large body practically flew over the patch I had just been standing in. Fast. Very fast. My sister screamed as the large bulk of its frame wound back around and charged again, this time shattering the headlights and submerging us in darkness.
Just go already!
My sister hollered in my ear. I'm trying, goddammit, I hissed. The wheels continued to spin helplessly. We were trapped. The creature charged again, this time nailing the window. A cobweb of cracks bloomed near my sister's head. I searched for anything, literally anything, that I could use as a weapon. I was never really a gun enthusiast, but at that moment, I'd have shaved my head and joined the secular monks if it meant having a Glock in my hand right then and there. After rattling the car once more, the reindeer finally appeared to lose interest and disappeared amidst the cluster of trees. Granted some time to breathe and think, we phoned our dad and told him about the situation. He was going to come down in his pickup and get us unstuck out of this mess. Looked over at my sister, who was taking long and steady breaths between her fingers. Are you all right? I asked.
What do you think?
She grumbled.
I told you to slow down.
Another jab. And this time I wasn't going to have it. You want to be useful? I yelled. Get out there and push. No? Then shut the hell up. I don't need it right now. She said nothing else and neither did I, returning once again to the pocket of silence that our relationship succumbed to. The sooner Dad's headlights peeked in the distance, the better. Suddenly, she rolled the window down. What are you doing? I asked.
Shh.
She pursed her lips.
Just listen.
Humoring her, I waited, and sure enough, the sound reached me too. The quiet voice of a little girl coming from outside.
Somebody,
it whispered.
I'm lost. Please help me. I'm lost.
My sister unlocked the door and motioned to open it. I grabbed her wrist.
What are you doing?
She snapped.
There's someone out there.
Just wait a second. It's weird, isn't it? The voice continued to whine, choking between sobs and pleading for someone, anyone to help her. I didn't like the way it sounded. The same lasting drawl between words, the same weeping sounds like someone was hitting repeat on a speaker. Something wasn't right, and my instincts were hoisting red flags left and right. Then my sister looked at me, and her expression warped into shock. She flung back, pinning both shoulders against the interior. Things that sounded like words bubbled up but didn't quite make it out of her throat. I turned and saw what was looking at me. It had the face of a man surrounded by the mottled fur of a caribou's body. The skin was a mummified brown color, wound tightly around its long skull like old crinkled leather. Snowflakes landed upon its wide, expressionless eyes and melted into the dark membranes of its pupils. It circled the car, bobbing its antlers and fogging up the windows as it peered inside. My heart shook the walls of my throat. I locked eyes with my sister, unable to say anything behind the sheer disbelief. I should have grabbed my phone, snapped a photo, recorded a video, anything, but my thoughts were jangled. It then let out that same horrible scream, but I didn't see its tight, contorted lips open. The sound was coming from its neck. Small, fleshy orifices flapping open like mouths were converting the high-pitched shrill into the mimicked cry of a little girl.
Help me. I'm lost. Help me.
Headlights glazed the area. My father's pickup came into view, paving its way down the path. The reindeer, or whatever the fuck it was, ran off, vanishing once again into the snow-covered thicket. Nobody believed us. Why would they? If anyone had told me that story, I would have assumed they were hopped up on some crazy psychedelic. But the reality of what I saw was cold, and it's something I still to this day can't fully swallow. Instead of sleeping that night, my sister and I did some research that led us to the myth of skinwalkers. Beings of some sort capable of mimicking voices and disguising themselves as animals to lure people into the woods. After reading other accounts, there wasn't a doubt in my mind what we witnessed out there. Every so often that night, I stared out the window and eyed the yard, wondering if I'd see that leathery face watching from the tree line. Neither I nor my sister ever made that trip again, much to the frustration of my family. But there was a silver lining. She and I have never been closer.
Today's fourth wondrous tale is We Stumbled Upon a Serial Killer While Camping, also by Jordan Grupe. This story features the vocal talents of me, Gamma, Akutabi, and Sprit Voices.
It was late at night, and we were driving up to the family cottage when the first police car came up behind us on the highway. My wife didn't see it at first, and she made a surprised noise before pulling over to the side of the single-lane highway. We slowly came to a stop on the gravel shoulder, and the cop car sped past us, the airstream buffeting us to the side. It was going very fast, I thought, even for a cop with his lights and sirens on. After a few moments, my wife pulled back onto the road. It was odd to see a police car, or any vehicle for that matter, this late at night on Highway 7. It was 3 a.m. and that had been the first car we'd seen for a while. After driving for a few more minutes, she exclaimed again and pulled over quickly. This time nearly a dozen police cars drove past. We watched them go in astonishment. What on earth would be going on to cause such a response? We live in Canada, so murders and gun crimes are uncommon. My first thought was an arson, or perhaps a drug bust, but that didn't seem right for the amount of cars and the time of night. The thought of a murder on the loose didn't even cross my mind. Not at the time. We kept driving and she pulled over 3 more times to let police cars go by. each time more than a few cubs sped past at high speeds. All told, about 30 of the squad cars went by before we saw the last one of them. The stereo had nothing but static for the most part, and Twitter was silent on the subject when I used the intermittent data service on my phone to check for police news in the area. It was a small community, so the local police department didn't even have a Twitter account, I noticed. By the time we got to the cottage, we were both exhausted. As I've described here before, our family cabin is a long way off the beaten path. We're at the end of an isolated peninsula on a small lake. It takes 30 minutes of driving down treacherous back roads, some of which barely qualified as roads, to reach the quaint little shack. And that's after the 4-hour drive on freeways and a single-lane highways just to get into the area. The place was so dilapidated we told people we were going camping when we went up there, even though it was technically a cottage. We pulled into the driveway, which was just a couple of tire tracks in the grass. I got out of the car and swatted mosquitoes as I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight app. The lake was still and quiet, with only the sound of crickets and bullfrogs, and the odd coyote howl in the distance. It would be another couple of hours before the birds began to sing and the bass began to jump out of the water, making unexpected splashing noises. I went up the cricketed wooden stairs to the front door and put the key in the lock, turning it with an effort, making a mental note to put a bit of lubricant on it before the end of the weekend. Stepping inside, I balked as I felt cobwebs on my face and felt something crawling on the back of my neck. I yelped and brushed the thing off me, feeling a spider bite the back of my neck before I could get to it with my hand. I made a pain noise and said a quick prayer to Jesus, asking to prevent infection and or give me Spider-Man abilities. I heard something move in the darkness of the cabin. We had mice, so at first I dismissed it as it was that, but then I took a second longer to process the sound. It had sounded larger than a mouse, whatever it was. Hello? I called into the cabin, my voice quivering. No one answered. I was worried momentarily that a raccoon had found its way in. It was possible, especially now that I noticed a draft coming from the back room. Maybe a window had broken from a fallen tree branch, allowing wildlife inside, I thought. There was no electricity in the cabin, since I hadn't hooked up the marine battery to the inverter yet. I used the light on my phone as I walked in further. Taking slow and tentative steps, my heart beat loud and fast in my ears. My mouth and throat felt dry, and my stomach felt fluttery and strange. Hello? I said again, still sensing another presence inside. Something with eyes, watching, waiting. I proceeded further and almost released the contents of my overfilled bladder into my pants when someone put their forearm around my neck, tightly choking me. I felt a cold steel blade dig into the flesh below my ear, and a sting as it prodded past the superficial skin, drawing blood. Warm trickled down the side of my neck and turned cold in the chilly night air.
Not a sound.
The voice behind me was not asking. It was a raspy-sounding man, his smoker's voice totally devoid of emotion.
Not a sound, or I will fucking kill you. Tell you a bitch to come inside.
My wife came in, saying something about how tired she was, and then she dropped what she was carrying and screamed. She stood frozen in the doorway. Mosquitoes flying in past her. The car headlights making her into a silhouette, a caricature of a scared person. Her hands were up at the sides of her face and her legs shook. She tried to say something but stammered and stopped.
I'm gonna take your car,
the man said.
Give me the keys.
I looked at my wife and tried to tell her to give the man the keys, but my voice didn't work. Another person was in the room, I noticed suddenly. There was a young teenage girl, in the shadows, behind the couch on the floor. She rocked back and forth silently in the darkness. The knife dug further into my neck and I cried out in pain.
The keys,
He said again.
They're in the car.
My wife managed. Her voice was just above a whisper.
your phones.
He said. Again, not a question. I handed my phone to him, my only source of light. There were flashlights scattered around the cabin, but the batteries inside will be questionable at best. We will be left in utter blackness, without a car, but that was the least of our concerns at that moment.
My wife put her phone on the ground and kicked it over to him after he told her to do so. He told her to move away from the door, and she came inside and stood in the kitchen. Now we were at an impasse. He would have to let me go if he wanted to take the girl with him, the one crying in the corner. I felt a wave of sorrow for her, knowing the feeling of just 1 minute at the mercy of this terrible man. His voice was inhuman, monstrous. He took the knife away from the side of my neck quickly and stabbed it into my thigh, up to the hilt. I screamed and fell to the floor, writhing in pain and rolling back and forth. The agony was so intense I couldn't catch my breath, and I felt for a moment that I would lose consciousness. I stayed awake, though, and felt fresh pain as the man reached down and pulled the knife out of my leg. Blood spurted high into the air and all over his face, drenching him in my blood. He laughed and looked down at me, his face crimson red and dripping, except for the whites of his eyes and his smiling teeth. He wiped the blade of the knife on his shirt, carefully, methodically. He didn't think about my wife, still behind him. He had called her my bitch, but he didn't know what a badass she actually is. My wife had been taking a lot of classes since our run-in with the locals our last time up at the cottage. She wanted to be prepared if we ran into trouble again here and had become obsessed with self-defense, and jiu-jitsu in particular. She had previously obtained a purple belt in BJJ, but was now even more dedicated, quickly progressing to a black belt in record time. She jumped into the air and managed to get her right leg up over his arm, the one that held the knife. A flying arm bar is a difficult maneuver to pull off, especially against a taller opponent, but she had been practicing like it was a full-time job. I had spent many nights as her practice dummy. She wrapped her arms around the man's wrist and yanked backwards with all her body strength. She had been working out and managed to break his arm with a loud snap. I'm sure the adrenaline pumping through her veins helped maximize her torque, as I had never seen her so successful against a larger opponent. She had also caught him completely by surprise. I heard more bones crack as she pulled back even further, not relenting at just one broken bone. The man screamed and howled as his ulna and radius broke in multiple places. His shoulder popped out of its socket farther and farther. I heard another loud snap. His humerus, maybe? I thought we had him beat then, but just as he had been caught by surprise, so were we. The girl who I thought was his prisoner suddenly appeared behind my wife and pulled her off the man, screaming and swiping at her. She had a knife as well, I saw with alarm. It was smaller, but she had it gripped tightly in her fist. The light cast by my cell phone, which lay haphazardly on the floor, illuminated the scene at times, but it was mostly shrouded by darkness. I couldn't see what was happening as I held tight pressure on my wound. I pulled off my shirt and wrapped it around my leg as a tourniquet, trying to make a futile effort to ignore my blood loss and get up to help. The man was no longer writhing on the floor. He had a furious look on his face and his arm hung limply at his side. I was suddenly terrified as I watched him get up to his knees shakily and try to stand. He fell once, face planting with a loud smack into the wooden floor. It seemed not to affect him, though, as he just got back up to one knee again. Then I saw in the dim light what he was reaching for. His knife was laying on the floor, just out of reach. He was trying to crawl over to it. In the darkness, I heard the two women fighting. It was starting to sound like my wife was getting the better of the younger girl, who was fighting like a wild woman. She had been screaming and sticking her with the tiny knife again and again, but was beginning to lose steam and slow down, her arms suddenly heavy and tired. My wife finally got a hold of her arm and twisted it backwards, dislocating the young girl's shoulder. She fell to the floor in a heap, holding her arm and making hurt animal-like noises. The man was just about to reach the knife, I realized. I shouted to my wife and told her to look out. She saw, but just a moment too late. She was going to try and kick the man in the chin as he reached for the knife, but he saw her at the last second and pulled away. She slipped on the floor, which was slick with far too much blood as her foot missed his face and the force of her kick lifted her off her feet. She fell down hard on her shoulders and neck, but didn't stay down for long. She got up covered in blood and tried to avoid the man as he slashed at her with the knife. My wife backed up into the kitchen counter and felt around behind her for a weapon. She found one. The man came at her and lunged. She sidestepped out of the way and he went past her, flying all of his body weight into the kitchen counter. He looked like he had the wind knocked out of him and was stunned for a moment. That was when my wife hit him in the back of the head with the frying pan. Hard. He collapsed to the floor and the girl ran over to him, screaming at us. I managed to get up to my knee and grabbed my phone. I held it in the girl's eyes, blinding her with the bright light. She covered her face and cursed at me, her voice pure rage. She cradled her arm, looking defiant despite her injuries. I picked up the knife the man had dropped and managed to get up on one leg. I held onto the wall for support and told my wife we needed to go, now. She agreed, and we limped out of there together. We got into the car and drove away, hearing the girl's insane voice from behind us, calling after us maniacally.
We're gonna find you, you know. Don't think you've won 'cause you ain't won shit. He's gonna wake up, and guess what? He'll be coming for you next. You ain't beat us. You ain't shit, you motherfuckers. You're gonna fucking die. You are gonna fucking die, you hear me?
We found out the next day when we read the paper just what had happened. The man was a cannibalistic serial killer, and the girl was his brainwashed accomplice and underage protege. The authorities had found human remains from multiple victims buried in his backyard, and had initiated a manhunt for him after he disappeared. That's why all the cop cars had passed us on the highway on the way up to the cottage. It was just our luck he had picked our isolated cabin, at the end of a peninsula, far away from prying eyes. The chances were 1 in a million, conservatively. He had been hiding there for just a few hours when we stumbled upon him. The worst part is, I know he's not dead, and he hasn't been caught. We called the police, but they managed to get away before they could get there. They're both trained hunters and survivalists, I found out since, so they know how to get by in the wild. I only hope the police manage to catch them before they can find us. I'm worried because I know there's a few things in the cabin that could have identified us. A fire permit which bore my mother's name hung from a board in the living room. The police say it wasn't there when they checked the cabin. I've got a new security system and additional locks on my doors, but I don't know if we can prevent the inevitable. It might be time I started taking jujitsu classes with my wife.
12 Days of Snow by Luminaria. Day 1. It was cold, though I guess that's to be expected when you're walking in the middle of a snowstorm. I was almost knees deep in a carpet of white. In hindsight, it was a dumb idea to be outside in this kind of weather, but in my defense, it wasn't this cold when I started my trip. It all just fell too quick. White fog escaped my mouth when I breathed, and I squinted through it to look down at my watch, raising it closer to my face. The needles had stopped moving at some points. It broke. Figures. I hunched further inside my jacket and tried to pull my sleeves further over my fingers before they froze. A pale shadow moved in my peripheral vision. I turned to look, but no one was there. Just snow falling and wind rustling. I sighed. My chest felt tight when the memories flooded back in. I can't recall the first time I saw those things. They've been around since I was a little kid. I knew they weren't real. Monsters don't exist. And the meds took the visions away, or used to. I couldn't pay for that sort of medicine while working at a cafe. Funny thing how the anxiety and hallucinations had been fine for my parents to deal with. Therapy, controlled meds, and hospital visits were fine too. But just me being me was past the limit. I was suddenly too much for them. Too much. Not that I was complaining. Jake had been a real bro to find this place for me when he found out my folks had kicked me out. Jake is a bro in general, the only co-worker who didn't mind switching shifts at times or cleaning the walk-in freezer, but, well, I digress. The advertisement was from some guy looking for a roommate to split house chores and rent, which was already crazy cheap, probably because the place was in the middle of nowhere, and the signal in the area was piss poor at best. But, hey, better having a roof than not. And just the thought of a heater already felt like a blessing. I could see the lights on the porch ahead already, but it seemed like an eternity passed before I reached it and pressed the doorbell. Nothing. The minutes stretched while I waited, breathing into my palms in an attempt to warm them up. I pressed the doorbell again. Nothing. There was nobody home. Oh crap, I was freezing here. What are you doing out there, kiddo? I lifted my head to see a man standing at the doorstep in a plain white t-shirt and jeans, lean frame, curly platinum white hair and ice blue eyes, eyebrows creased in a confused frown. I stared. He stared back. We held a staring contest for about 5 seconds before I managed to introduce myself. He ushered me inside and cranked the heating up until my teeth stopped chattering, which I was thankful for. And that's how I met Gabe. From the way he spoke, I assumed he was around my dad's age, though, judging by looks alone, I'd have believed it if someone had told me he was 25. He was one of those people who aged annoyingly well, I guess. He looked, for all intents and purposes, like a Greek statue had escaped the museum and was now walking around. Well, sort of walking if you ignore the crutches. Gabe was a veteran. I'm not sure about the details, but warded a number on his legs. He could still get around on his own, but he was slow and couldn't stand for long periods. The part on that ad about splitting house chores started making more sense then, other than, just being a common courtesy. You can have the room upstairs. Got any luggage? No, just my backpack. Okay, make yourself at home. There's food in the fridge, but fair warning, I'm a vegetarian, so if you want meat, you go get it and cook it yourself. Day 2. The house was like a small 2-story cottage furnished in vintage style. There were antiques everywhere, or at least dupes good enough for my untrained eye not to notice the difference. There was even a corded phone in the living room, those with the twirly cable and numbers in a turning disc instead of on a keyboard. There were electrical sockets, no issue, so at least I wouldn't have to worry about keeping my phone charged. But the snowstorm outside was doing its thing. I wasn't getting a signal. Neither cell phone nor Wi-Fi. Sadly, that meant ordering a pizza was out of the question. We had eggs and toast for breakfast, where I was pleasantly surprised to find a large assortment of jams in the cupboard, and pasta with an extremely cheesy sauce for lunch. Not the lot of healthy veggies and salads I'd been expecting, but hey, if food was going to be like that every meal, I wasn't going to complain. On the lower floor was the landing and living room, a little kitchen and dining room blended space, a bathroom, an office, and Gabe's room. Upstairs was my room, another larger bathroom, and a little atrium, sunroom of sorts. Everything felt old, but in a lived-in way rather than the sunroom, which I had to dust off and sweep. It made sense. It was pretty cold with the current weather, and Gabe mostly stayed downstairs, either watching the old TV in the living room, reading, or painting in his office. His office smelled of ink and turpentine, and was cluttered with more books, strewn papers, frames, and canvases than should have fitted in the small room. It was hard to even walk in without tripping on something. The books were all over the place and didn't seem to follow any specific theme or language. A bunch of them I couldn't read, not even the title, but it was the paintings that were the stars of the room. Do you, sell those for a living? Nah, it's just a hobby. Gets boring here pretty fast otherwise. Well, if you ever felt like selling the paintings, they might bring in some good cash. I wasn't an artist by any means, but even I could see that they were stunning. The depth and perspective of everything, the way the sun and shade in the images felt so real. For some of them, I had to look really close to notice the brushstrokes and make sure they weren't actually pictures taken with a camera. There were flowers and still life, wide landscapes, idyllic scenes, and people partying. Hey, got any favorites, kiddo? My eyes wandered around until settling on a painting the size of a sheet of printer paper framed on the back wall. A dainty girl in a summer dress and with long wavy hair stood beneath a large tree, peeling some sort of fruit, while a pair of children sat nearby, I assumed waiting for the snacks to be handed out. While the full picture was great, it was obvious that a lot more care and effort had been put on the girl than on everything else. "That's your girlfriend?" I teased. My little sister," he simply said and shrugged. Or, how I remember her as. I haven't seen her in ages. Oh. Now that was awkward. You look alike." "I'll take that as a compliment, thanks," he snickered. I wasn't fully sure on how my life would keep unfolding from then on, but at least now the uncertainty wasn't as suffocating as before. For now, I liked the house, and I liked Gabe. I went to bed feeling light and hopeful, and paid no heed to the shadows flickering outside. Day 6. I woke up to a light tapping sound, repeating non-stop. I didn't know if it was too early or just the weather making the sky darker than it was supposed to be. The storm still raged on, snow falling and dulling the sounds outside, till everything felt strangely empty. I begrudgingly opened my eyes and stood up, wondering if there was a rat or some bug scurrying around. There was a face on my window, and hands gripping the sill from the outside. My heart kind of skipped a beat. I rubbed the sand off my eyes and looked again. Well, there was no one there, of course. I breathed a sigh of relief, changing clothes and heading to the bathroom to wash my face and brush my hair. I forgot the hairbrush, so I had to turn back again. And then, the face was there, cheeks and fingers patting against the window. Crackly grey skin and a mouth with too many teeth. "You're not real. I'm seeing things. I'm just seeing things," I told myself, pressing my palms against the window, trying to gather some speck of rationality my frayed nerves hadn't destroyed yet. While the glass felt cold and solid, a safe barrier between me and... the face slammed itself against the window with a dull thud. I screamed. Gabe made his way up the stairs after a while. I'm not sure how long. When he got there, I was curled into a ball in the corner, still screaming and crying. Couldn't stop. Just that thing. That dead-looking thing. Oh, just take it away. "It's okay, kiddo. It's okay now. You just breathe." I forced myself to blink. There was nothing on my window. Of course there wasn't. This was the second floor. But that face, an ashen grey face with a rusty, deformed metal plate covering half of it. Its breath fogged the window, its discoloured cheeks and fingers making low, disconcerting noises as they were rubbed against the glass pane. Sad, old, broken. That face was printed in my mind now. I could still see it when I closed my eyes. It felt so real, but it wasn't real. I mean, it couldn't be. God, I was going crazy. Gabe guided me into sitting down on the bed and taking deep, slow breaths, then sat down with me while I tried to focus. I was trying to regain control of my own lungs and organize my thoughts into a more coherent stream. Air in, air out, rinse and repeat. It took a couple of minutes until I was breathing more or less normally, but I still couldn't stop shaking. Gabe theorized that giving me a sugar boost might help, so we moved to the kitchen, and I sat down with a bag of ice pressed to my head while he whipped up a plate of syrupy pancakes for me. "Thanks, Gabe. You're an angel." "And you're a human," he snorted and patted my back. "Just eat your pancakes." I did, or I nibbled the pancakes at least. They tasted good, but I just couldn't muster much of an appetite. "Hey, why did you join the war?" I asked. "Why that question now?" You don't strike me as the sort of guy who'd ever wield a gun. Why'd you do it?" He said there wasn't a set reason. I could ask 10 of them why they went to the war, and I get 10 different answers. Some fought for freedom, a better future, or to protect others. Some fought to gain something, or because they were pressured to, or they felt like they had no choice. Some even fought just because everyone else was fighting too, so why not? My reason? None. I wasn't thinking at all. And he shook his head. My kid was murdered. One day he was out with friends, healthy and happy. Next he was dead and his face was covered in blood. That's what made me join really, really late. I just saw red and I wanted each and every one of them to suffer and die. He sighed. There was no kind word or talk of forgiveness that I'd listen to. You know what? No matter how many fell, it didn't make me feel better. No rest for the wicked, right? He chuckled, and it was the most bitter and sad sound I'd ever heard. Oh, I'm still angry, kiddo. Think I always will be. I just got tired, too. And so that was it. He lost his little boy, and then he just lost it. No honorable ideal, no nothing. Just violent and all-encompassing grief. I didn't know if that was something that should be forgiven or not, and I sure didn't ask him. I just ate my pancakes and let him keep patting my back. And I realized I wasn't shaking anymore. Day 12. Morning came with more snow, and I was starting to wonder if it would ever stop. It had been piling up for almost 2 weeks now, since the first day I'd arrived, like it was trying to gobble me up along with the whole house. We still had food for the time being, but it was starting to worry me seriously. Neither I nor Gabe had a car, and I couldn't see another house or any neighbors in the area. For how long would we be stranded in that building? Gabe told me to take it easy, mainly after what had happened the previous week. And I knew just worrying over it wasn't going to solve anything. But I was growing more and more anxious anyway, and that wasn't even mentioning the risk of me being fired because I couldn't possibly get to work. God, I prayed I wouldn't get fired. But at that rate, staying inside was going to drive me crazy, so I laid up as best I could and stepped outside, deciding I could at least do something productive and shovel the snow out of the porch. I figured that if it got too cold, I'd just go back inside, no harm done. Boy, was I wrong. A few minutes after I stepped outside, I could swear I saw something moving in the corners of my field of view. Then I turned, and there was nothing there. It was all in my head. I was getting worse, and that thought terrified me. There's no way I could pay for antipsychotics or therapy out of my own pockets. My current roommate was nice, but I only knew the guy for 2 weeks. What if I had another breakdown and he decided he didn't want to deal with me anymore? What would happen to me? Well, I had to hang in there. I needed to. A low rumble echoed from somewhere around, far away. I huffed, angrily dusting snow off the porch with both a shovel and my own shoes, and scraping the frost off the little ornamental fence, frustrated with myself. Something moved in my peripheral vision again. I squinted, straining my eyes and peering across the white horizon, and I waited, trying to convince myself there wasn't anything out there, because there shouldn't be. There was no one, nothing in that storm besides wild wind and frozen water. I was about to shove the last bit of snow off and call it a day when I saw them standing out there, by the edge of the yard, the faintest outlines of people. There were 3 of them, pale and immobile, partially camouflaged by the scenery's natural color scheme. Oh, what now? I mumbled, momentarily forgetting my shovel. There weren't any people out in the storm besides me. That was the very problem I was facing, even with no one else living in that vicinity and no signal to contact civilization outside. What crazy stuff was my fried nincompoop brain trying to concoct this time? Hello? I called out loud. Gabe, can you come out for a minute and check this out? Yeah, I'm an idiot. So sue me. Oh, please don't. At least I still had half a mind to also ask her for a second opinion from someone who's probably not crazy. Except the guy was also one of the slowest walkers on the planet, so I was going to be waiting there for a while. I craned my neck and squinted once more, holding one hand cupped around my face to help me see and willing my eyes to either confirm or deny the humanoid figures standing at the very edge of my sight. Well, they were there. One seemed smaller than the other two, but I couldn't tell for sure. A child, or was it just farther away? Well, either way, they were starting to move now, staggering slightly in the snow. Maybe there really were people in there, freezing, like I'd been 2 weeks before. "Hey, you all right? Do you need help?" I called out to them. I was shouting, and even though the calling left my own lungs, I could barely hear it above the raging wind. That's my luck, I guessed. I shoveled the snow off the first couple of steps from the porch, trying to open up a path while they waddled past the yard edge. And then I bumped into something. One of the figures was suddenly beside me, and I smashed directly into it, almost sending myself cartwheeling in the snow. But instead, I found myself on my knees, looking up at a shape far too tall and grey to be a living human. He stood at least 7 feet tall, in a wispy ash-grey cloak and half-molten pieces of armour, giving it the appearance of restraint rather than protection. A loop of bone adorned its head like a bizarre crown. The thing also wore a mask, or a broken helmet made of metal. Its breath echoed weirdly through the slits, and I could imagine an abnormal amount of eyes leering at me through the shadows of its face cover. Close. Too close. His fingers were almost touching me. "Oh, come on," I groaned, picking my shovel back up and angrily started shoveling the last remnants of snow off the pathway, chiding my own brain. I couldn't even be creative. Of course I couldn't. Always the same big, lanky, creepy shit. Well, newsflash for you, you defective organ living rent-free in my skull. I already know it's not real. It doesn't exist. It shoved its hand into my chest, solid and pointy, sharp fingers sinking past the ribcage. I sputtered, pain flaring through me so intense that I froze, twitching against the creature's hand. The weirdest part is, I wasn't bleeding. It's like the thing's fingers just passed through. Not as in an illusion or ghost passing through. No, it's as if my body was made of water and this monster ruptured that water's surface, and its fingers were now swimming inside me. I gasped and sputtered more, trying to pry it away, but it was stronger than me. They were stronger than me. The thing swarmed me, pinning me down and straddling my body, my arms pinned to my sides by grey, spindly limbs. It was like being sat on by a giant ice sculpture, by Edward Scissorhands or an ungodly blend of both. It was so cold it burned, so much I couldn't even scream. I thought the pain couldn't get any worse until it found whatever it was they were searching for in my chest and tugged it half out. It was pure, unbridled agony. Worse than if it had ripped my heart out. There was some sort of golden ball of light, its glow spilling to illuminate the porch like a weird garden lamp. It tore chunks off the light and brought them to its mouth. Christ, it was eating me. It hurts. It hurts. Oh my God, it hurts. Brother. It spoke? Someone was shouting. I turned my head slightly, trying to see what caught the thing's attention. There was Gabe, braced against the wall on the landing, flailing his crutches at the things atop me, like he was telling kids to get off his lawn. "This is my domain," he started, stepping out of the house. "This is my porch." Something made a weird breaking sound as he approached. It took me a second to realize it was one of the crutches, slammed against one of the creature's heads and sending it rearing into the snow. The crutch's thin wooden exterior splintered, revealing something sharp that glistened below. "And this is my kid. I found him. He's mine now. You'll not have this one." I had the thought before that he didn't look like the sort of guy who'd wield a gun, and I was right. The thin twin longsword suited him a lot better, as weird as that was. His voice was starting to ring in my ears, though, distorting and echoing, like that thing's voice did. "By the authority granted me hither, be gone or I'll splatter those bloody, corrupted heads of yours into smithereens. smaller than the fall itself could. The creature rose back from the snow, looking slightly disoriented, and then they all pounced at Gabe. Something in the back of my mind told me not to look, and I closed my eyes. But even through clenched eyelids and remaining prone on the ground, I could still feel a flare of light. The monsters instantly cleared away as waves of cold and heat washed over me. The noise hurt my ears, and something wet and warm started running from them and from my nose. It smelled like iron. Metal clashed against metal. I had no idea what was going on. It just hurt. It was hard to breathe. I kept my eyes closed and tried to focus on breathing despite the pain. Gabe had gone silent, but I could hear the creatures screaming weird words and curses. Something about hordes of light and betrayal and fruits. They screamed and screamed and screamed, and then, one by one, their screams became gurgling, and it all finally stopped. "Still with me, kiddo?" Gabe's voice asked, no longer ringing like before. "Cough if you're conscious." I coughed. Okay, good. Let's get you back inside." A pair of hands slid under my armpits and dragged me back into the house. He took me into his office, placing me belly up on the couch before staggering to sit on the armrest behind my head. A dull clang told me he'd dropped his crutches, swords, onto the floor nearby. "What?" I coughed again. "What were those things?" The unnamed. 2 Grigori and a cherub, if you want to be specific." "Unnamed what?" "They're angels from the lower rank legions who were never given individual names. They lost their light in the fall and keep trying to get it back by eating others, which doesn't work, by the way." Gabe sighed. "You can open your eyes. It's safe now." I forced my eyes open, fighting against the blurriness in my vision. Something wet and cold was dripping onto my wound. Drip, drip. Gabe mumbled to himself, groaning in frustration. "I don't understand. This is what she did. Am I doing something wrong?" Black. His blood was black. His hand was raised above the ball of light still on my chest. His palm was bleeding, a thick tar-colored liquid oozing from it and onto the light. Drip, drip, drip. For some reason I couldn't understand, the black drops that fell onto the light sizzled and started shining along, and as the gold glow slowly got brindled with silver, the searing pain in my chest started to dull a little bit. "Gabe?" "Right here, kiddo." He smiled. "Gabe," I gasped. "Am I dying?" "You're not." He ruffled my hair with his other hand. "Souls are infinite. They can't be destroyed." "Then why does it hurt?" His face scrunched up, somewhere between a grimace and a wince. "Well, they can't be destroyed, but they can be torn." I stared at the silver glow, soft and dim compared to the gold. A blank filling patchwork like scar tissue. There was a piece of me that wasn't there anymore. My identity, likes and dislikes, memories. It was hurting because there was a gap in me. Gabe was filling it back up, but he wasn't me, and he couldn't give me what he didn't have. He couldn't replace what was taken from me exactly as it was before. All the while he kept asking me a lot of things, random things. My age and blood type, my favorite color, the name of my childhood dog. I didn't have a dog. My opinion on carrots, and so on. He made me retell everything I've told here. Why I'd needed to move, and how I found his house. "Hey, what's your name?" Nothing left my mouth. I couldn't remember. I knew Gabe, and I told him what I was called when we introduced ourselves to each other, but I couldn't remember my own freaking name. "Your name's Taylor," he sighed and patted me on the head. "Why are you here?" "Because I couldn't stay at my folks' place anymore. Well, they didn't take me coming out well, so I had to find somewhere cheap. A friend at work found out I was looking for a place to move and showed me an ad of someone looking for a roommate. He told me to go check it out." "Oh, good. And then?" As I was going to, Dad popped up at the end of my shift after everyone left. Said he wanted to talk. He was so drunk. And after, I told him to leave. Said it was closing time and I had to go. He started yelling at me. I yelled back. He shoved me and I stumbled into the freezer. And the door closed and it was so cold and my breath hitched in my throat. I couldn't remember getting out, only walking and walking. It was so cold and I was freezing. I reached a porch and Gabe opened the front door. I already died, didn't I? He took a long while to respond. I watched him just staring out of the window into the never-ending snowstorm outside, brows furrowed like he was weighing his options. Wonder what he was thinking. Could have kept me at his place forever, watching TV, complaining of the weather, and eating meals together. A feeble substitute to the family he'd lost. But he didn't force me to stay. You're not dead yet, he finally said, and let out a long breath. You're in the realm Adam and Eve were expelled from, where my kind has dwelled since before the War of Heaven. It's a place all souls return to when they die, either attracted towards their assigned guardian's domain or guided here by them. But one doesn't need to be dead to come here. Humans with Nephilim ancestry, oracles, mediums, and astral projectors, or whatever you call them nowadays, they have the ability to walk or at least peek into here to some degree. Others can reach this place through occult rituals or crossing thresholds in places where the boundaries are blurry. But there are cases, like yours, when a body just gets so damaged they're almost dead. Almost, but not quite. So the soul wanders out until your body is fit enough to house you again. Problem is, the longer you stay out or interact with anyone here, the harder it is for you to go back. Your connections to the other side fray. So, you better get going soon. Wait, so you're my guardian angel? He shook his head. I've not taken in any children since Yeshua died. I'm not sure why you came to me. Maybe your actual guardian is dead, or maybe his soul was still unclaimed. You just got here by chance. He huffed and then shrugged and gave the tiniest of smiles. Well, either way, I'm glad you got here. You've made the house feel like a home for a little while. I felt like crying again. Heck, I did cry again. No shame about that. It started with a sob, and soon I was bawling and didn't stop for a while. I wish my parents had told me that too. That they were happy to have me. They probably never would, I knew, but someone else did, and the amount of relief I felt almost made my heart explode. You need to get back to your body, kiddo, he said, after giving me a moment to calm down. And how do I do that? I asked. Do I just have to wake up somehow? Gabe grimaced again. If you don't know the way, I have to send you back. But I've been trying to since you got here. I don't understand why it's not working. What is it I'm missing? He trailed off, his gaze shifting to stare at the painting across the room. Well, it has to work both ways. He speed-walked across towards the painting, faster than I'd seen him move ever before. There was an awful noise of ceramic cracking when he did. So I guess he could run when he wanted to. It looked painful, and his steps left bloody, blackish footprints in his wake. I had to suppress a second-hand wince on his behalf. He took the painting from the wall, out of its frame, and into an envelope along with a note he hastily scribbled. A deal's a trade between two parts, so it won't work if it's one-sided. I do something for you that you couldn't do alone. You do something for me that I couldn't do. I had no idea what he was rambling on about. I wasn't even in the right realm of existence, for heaven's sake. What could I possibly do for him that he couldn't? Taylor. The sound of my own name again made me feel dazed. Do you want to go back? I nodded. I need to send this parcel. Can you deliver it for me? I nodded again and suddenly felt very sleepy. I think I remember him smiling with relief and nodding back at me, but not sure if he really did or if I was just dozing off. And everything faded into a blur of white. I woke up to the bright fluorescent lights of a hospital room, with an IV attached to my arm and half lulled, half risen by the beeping of medical machinery. They said I was in that walk-in fridge for 12 hours, between the time when my shift ended and when someone found me at the start of the morning shift and called an ambulance. 12 hours, in contrast to the 12 days I'd spent at Gabe's place. It was a miracle I was alive and didn't lose any body parts due to frostbite. I heard at first that the hospital had intended to contact my parents, but the police had gotten involved. Once the camera footage at my work was reviewed and they saw my dad, well, you can guess. So the doctors contacted my grandparents instead. It's weird to think of it. They were iffy about me before, too, thinking I was just going through a difficult phase and needed to snap out of it, and so on, but when they heard I'd almost died, they ran straight to see me. I've moved in with them. Well, they're old, so there's a lot of things that they still don't get, but they're trying to learn and are being supportive. It's made me cry like a fountain a couple of times by now, but in a nice way. I think I've become an official crybaby, but who cares? Well, that was all back in November. Been seeing a therapist since then. She's nice, though I'm pretty sure she doesn't believe me when I told her about Gabe. Heck, I don't think I'd believe it either if I heard it from someone else. I only know that it was real and not just a trauma-induced hallucination, because I still have his letter. The envelope was on the nightstand when I woke up in the hospital, tucked inside my backpack along with the rest of my stuff. It wasn't sealed shut, so I've looked through it a couple of times. There's the painting, just as I remembered, and a letter. I can't read the letter. I don't understand the language at all. The words are not in any alphabet I can recognize, and I start getting migraines when I look at them for too long. There's only one thing I can read. The 2 words inscribed on the outside of the envelope. Probably so I'd know who would receive it. To Lucy. Well, there's no address to mail it to anywhere. Maybe I was supposed to just know where to go, and there are times when it feels like I do. Sometimes I'm walking home from work or just taking a stroll, and I feel like taking a detour somewhere strange for no reason. To skip off the trail while hiking and head into the woods or into some dark alleyway I can't see the end of. Shaded corners, dark corridors, liminal spaces. All the times it's happened, I willed some sense back into myself and went home. Yeah, the unnamed angels are one reason, but I also don't want to get mugged, you know. But it's gotten to the point past just curiosity. It became an almost unavoidable compulsion. Last week I zoned out while washing dishes after dinner, and when I came to, it was 1 a.m. and I was stepping into the yard of some abandoned building on the other side of town. It's not that I don't want to fulfill my promise to Gabe. He helped me, he saved me. I owe him that much. Even if I didn't, I don't know how much longer I can delay it anyway. The new year's approaching, and the whole world will be at a threshold. I guess I just wanted someone to know what really happened. I've queued this to be posted automatically on January 1st. Well, hopefully I'll still be here to catch it and add a little edit like, "Hey, I survived," or similar afterward, and just laugh at how silly I was being. But I'm scared. When I get wherever this deal is leading me to, Gabe won't be there to help or to send me back. And if that was really Gabriel, as in the Archangel Gabriel, then I can guess also who Lucy is. I don't think I'll make it back again.
The next up is The Google Algorithm is Beginning to Scare Me by Jordan Grupe. This story features the vocal talents of Detective Creepypasta and Pumpkin Queen.
The Google algorithm has been acting up lately. It's been giving me very strange recommendations. Usually it's right on the money, and sometimes predicts things that I want before I have even mentioned them out loud, and I wonder how it works. Is it reading my mind? Or does it just know me better than I know myself? For instance, recently I was thinking about replacing my laptop. The old one was starting to malfunction and was slowing down to the point of being irritating. Surely enough, ads for laptops started appearing at the side of my browser window when I visited various websites, even though I hadn't mentioned the problem to anyone, and hadn't even said out loud that the laptop was bothering me. Again and again, ads began to show up that catered to my very exact needs, getting more and more creepily specific. A hole ripped suddenly in my underwear, and an ad for underwear popped up on my Google phone. I broke a coffee mug, and ads for coffee mugs started to show up. I didn't even have to think about stuff after a while. It popped up on my feed before I even knew I wanted it. I tried not to give in to these temptations, but I couldn't help myself. The ads were too perfect. It was everything I ever needed at the click of a button. It didn't help that I had a shopping addiction once upon a time. This brought it all back. The bills began to pile up as my online shopping became a real problem for my wife and I financially. I started seeing looks of disgust and annoyance on her face when she talked to me, and I realized I was ruining our marriage with my constant need for these perfect new things which were clearly meant so specifically just for me. But to be honest, it wasn't just that. There were problems long before that. The buying habit was just an escape, I had begun to realize. Still, I couldn't let her take that from me. She wanted to cut up my credit card and wanted to cancel it, but I told her no. Then, very soon after that, new ads started to appear when I was browsing on my laptop. Ads for shovels, for lye, for dark clothing and flashlights, for spades, pickaxes, and grass seed. Strange, I thought at first, since we didn't even live in a house with a backyard. Why was it making such odd recommendation all of a sudden? Looking at the laptop more closely, I realized why the algorithm had my desires wrong suddenly. I wasn't synced to my Google account. The laptop was logged into my wife's profile. But why would she want to buy those items? Gardening tools don't make a lot of sense when you don't have a garden, or even a yard. I opened up the history tab, going back and seeing what she had been looking at. Strangely, the last 24 hours were wiped blank. She was still out at the grocery store, so I pulled up the bank statements and her credit card account, overwhelmed with a desire to find out the truth, like an itch in my mind that I couldn't help but scratch. When I logged into my Google account and I tried to follow the money, as they always say in movies, I couldn't help but notice the new ads dominating the borders of my computer screen. Learn self-defense now. Meadow Valley Karate School, currently accepting new students. Put on these brand new Nike running shoes and get outside. Go! And then finally, Bob's Gun Store. You can't put a price on safety. The last one was actually nearby, and so I decided to quit browsing the internet and just get out of the house. After all, the only thing I could find in our bank and credit card history was a big cash withdrawal for the day prior. It hadn't been me. Only Christine could have taken that money out. But why? Part of me wasn't surprised when I saw her car parked outside of the gun store. She was so transfixed by her new purchase that she didn't even notice me as I drove past, gawking at her. She was holding a large pistol in her hand and stroking it thoughtfully. Christine had always said she hated guns. I guessed maybe she had changed her mind. I drove for a long time after that, more afraid than I had ever felt in my life, terrified of the woman I had married. A couple of hours outside of the city, my phone started to ring. I pulled over onto the graveled shoulder and fished a Google Pixel phone out of my pocket with shaking hands, looking at the screen. It was a video call from Christine. She was obviously wondering where I was. Swiping up on the screen, I saw her face appear. Seeing it made me feel like I had been wrong about everything, like it had all been a big mistake. She could never do anything to hurt me. Hey, where are you? Are you driving? I asked her, seeing the background of her video call. She looked to be on the country road somewhere.
Yeah, of course. I was worried sick about you. I pulled up your GPS data on your phone because you didn't come home for dinner. Where are you going?
Of course, I had forgotten about that. She knew my passwords and could track my phone. Tell him to stay where he is, a man's voice said in the background.
Stay where you are. I am coming to get you. Okay?
She was coming to get me, all right. Christine, whose voice was that? The call suddenly cut out as her stumped face seemed unable to come up with a response to my question. I'm browsing my phone now, looking for a motel where I can spend the night. The promoted ones that keep popping up are for places in Mexico. I think maybe I should listen to Google this time.
Today's seventh wondrous tale is Itchy by Sylvester Cooper. This features the vocal talents of Mr. Creeps.
You know that feeling of an overpowering itch? The type you can't possibly resist scratching. It's truly annoying, isn't it? It usually starts as slight irritation of the tissue beneath your skin, as though it was being pricked by some sort of thin, fibrous probe, intent on driving you insane. Another maddening trait of a terrible itch is how it jumps randomly to another patch of your epidermis. This seemingly random jump is made all the more irritating in that it always takes place after you've either satisfied the itch's original location, or when you've mentally pushed the urge aside. This relocation is also usually to a spot several times more sensitive to the irksome itch. This jump can repeat a number of times until you're driven into a mad fit of scratching, and then your skin gets all red and irritated, and if you're not careful, you may draw blood. For a fraction of a second, you might think the itch and its ability to jump randomly around your body seemed a bit too calculated, as though there had been a wicked intelligence behind it. And then you would think better about it, and call yourself a fool for considering such a thing. Even take medication, believing that you might have suffered from a potent allergen. Well, you would be both wrong and right. Your itch wasn't caused by a bit of pollen, mold, or animal dander. Okay, sometimes they can be the cause, but not nearly as often as you would think. No, there is usually an intelligence behind a terrible itch. How do I know, you may ask? Well, I'll tell you, you silly human. I'm the intellect behind the itch. Well, either me or one of my siblings. Now don't try and find us. The greatest of your hunters couldn't find one of us in an open field on a sunny day, so don't bother trying. What are we called and what do we look like? Well, I won't share a name, but seeing as impossible for you to find us, I'll give you a brief description. We are roughly the size of a small child, but our arms are longer than a grown man is tall. Our faces are wide and usually sport fiendish grins, especially if we have driven a human mad from itching. The nail, talons, or claws, whichever you're more uncomfortable with, extend out from our three-fingered hands. They can slither across entire rooms without a hint of noise, as they seek human flesh. With painstaking patience and incredibly skilled strikes, they embed themselves deep into human tissue like hypodermic needles in a thousandth of a second. And then they retreat, waiting to strike again. Why do we do this? Well, the same reason why I'm writing this. To screw with you. Geez, you would think a species as smart as you think yourselves to be would be able to figure that out. Unpleasant itching, everyone.
Today's penultimate offering is Killing My Childhood Monster Was Easier Than I Thought by Nerd Cora Neal, featuring the vocal talents of being scared.
Killing my childhood monster was easier than I thought. I never thought that I could do it, but there we were. I did it. I thought that it would be hard, but it was so easy. The idea of ending a man's life, with my own hands no less, gave me a great sense of anxiety before. The act of it, however, was so much more satisfying than I had ever thought possible. Don't get me wrong, When I say that it was easy, I do not mean the literal action of taking his life. He put up quite a fight, as he was so much bigger than I was. He always was, after all, which made him so intimidating when I was a child. For so long, the pain he inflicted on me went unpunished, because I was scared. I was scared that if I told anyone, I wouldn't be believed. I was scared that if I had attempted to defend myself, he would hurt me so much worse. It's funny, when I was finished, I looked over at him lying there, weak, helpless, dead. He was a monster, a cruel, evil beast. The only regret is that it took me so long to finally put him down. It sickens me to think about how many other children had to suffer because of my silence and inaction. I hate that it took the idea of him touching my boy to finally do something. The first time my boy came to me and told me about it, I knew who it was right away. I had always hoped that my own childhood trauma was all in my head, that I imagined it, but it had always been a reality. When my boy told me about the tall man, I shuddered. When he told me about his long, skinny arms reaching out to him, I cried. When he told me about these cold, dead eyes staring at him as he choked him to the point of near death before releasing his grip, I was done. Tonight, as the boy slept, I hid in his room and I waited. I waited all night long. I almost believed that it was all in his head, as I had previously imagined it was in my head, until I saw it. I saw the doorknob turn, and I could feel my heart racing. The door opened and there it was, the tall, skinny silhouette. It became bigger as he began to walk toward the boy's bed. I gripped my baseball bat and struck first. He turned around in surprise as I swung with all my might. He dodged it at first, and then he grabbed me by the throat. He cursed as he screamed at me before I smashed his face with my forehead. I quickly grabbed the bat again and swung once more. The bat broke in half as it smashed over his head. He screamed so loud, and it was so disturbing that I almost threw up. But I kept my cool. He fell to the ground and I mounted him. Remembering my childhood, I began punching repeatedly, thinking about how he hurt me. I kept punching. Thinking about how he hurt my boy, I began punching harder. I kept punching until there was nothing left to punch but the floor, stained with blood and fragments of bone. When I was finally finished, I took the time to calm down and think about the situation I was now in. I look over to the boy, a look of shock, fear, and confusion on his face. It was then that I remembered that he was not my son, but my patient. I then remembered that it wasn't my monster that was hurting him, but his own. I remembered that my own monster is still out there, hurting God knows how many children, and until I find him, I'm going to settle for the monsters of other children who come to see me in my office. This was the first, and there are so many more to go. Lucky for me, my mask hides my identity, so the boy doesn't know who I am. All he knows right now is that he won't be hurt anymore. Before too long, the light in the hallway turned on, and I could hear his mother call out to his father. I quickly escaped from the bedroom window that I snuck in, and could hear the scream of the mother calling out the name of the father. I killed a monster tonight, though only the boy will ever know, unless he decides to tell the police about the abuse his own father had inflicted on him. I have so many patients with their own monsters that I need to deal with. Parents, teachers, and every other monster that has touched these children will be hunted and slaughtered. One day, I will track him down. I will kill my own monster.
Today's final fantastic tale is The Ghoul of Valley Gorge by Mr. Evan312. This story features the vocal talents of Nature's Temper and G.M. Danielson.
Bloody hell, I'm starving.
Those dreary words often echoed around the camp of desperate, bloodied souls. Some spoken aloud, others only passed in pained whispers, or simply purveying the entire atmosphere in the Valley Forge encampment. Morale was incredibly low, lower than the temperature. The flashing steel and the blood-red uniforms of the British Army were as far from everyone's mind as the ragged band of patriots languished in the cold. The biggest danger to the Continental Army did not come from without, but from within. No enlisted man, officer, nor volunteer did not know hunger. Without proper supplies, they'd taken to eating anything from roots and tree bark to cotton or sawdust, just to fill the howling voids that were their shrunken guts. What Solomon, or Sully, as his comrades called him, did not like was that the words came from Arthur, his closest friend. They were dragging a wrapped, stiff corpse of a perished fellow patriot through the surrounding forest. The look in his eyes as he sized up the body gave Sully a strange feeling in his stomach. He could not fault Arthur that much. They wore ragged uniforms, or at least what passed for uniforms in this outfit, none of which did much to prevent the cold from seeping into their very bones. They carried muskets over their shoulders, which they'd fired in anger at the English, and both of them had killed men before. Yet, just like many of the boys in this so-called army, they could not call themselves true hardened soldiers. Even those true soldiers that remained were in the same boat as the rest. Officer or low ranking, the hunger, misery, and the cold were truly equalizers.
What's wrong, Sully?
The boy tried biting his tongue. Arthur was younger than him, not by much, but he acted even younger. He was a rash and flighty youth. Sully made sure to stick to his friend like honey to keep him out of trouble. But like Arthur's hunger made him impulsive and morbid, Sully's made him incredibly irritable and quick to anger. And this time, he gave in to the rage.
Must you always say that whenever you look at a corpse?
He barked harshly.
God damn it, Arthur. These are people.
Sully dropped the feet of the body, causing his friend to stumble under the weight as he stood to take his full height.
Christ. If you so much as think of that sort of thing again...
I'm not,
Arthur protested, the look of hunger replaced with one of shame. He nervously rubbed his hands on his threadbare sleeves, trying to warm his stiff, achingly cold fingers as best he could.
I've been hearing things in the camp. They's keeping Washington's horse on their armed guard. Wonder what they're getting paid to keep their chops off that thing. I bet it'd feed a dozen men for a week. I'm long tired of boiled bark and moss.
Sully folded his arms tightly to his chest, hugging what was left of his already thin blue and red trim jacket to his pronounced ribs. Like Arthur, he'd forgotten the feeling of a full belly, forced to subsist on little more than a few scarce roots that they dug from the winter-hardened soil.
Can't enjoy the meat when you've got a noose around your neck with a bullet in your liver. Don't make me teach you what becomes of those who give in and eat human flesh.
Arthur suddenly froze in place, turning only his eyes to look onto those of his older friend. A pale look had entered the boy's rosy, frost-nipped cheeks.
Please spare me, Sully. You know I hate those kind of stories.
And so he did. Arthur was, in many ways, a fearless lad, never scared of his fellow man. He was a fierce fighter in battle for his smaller size, reminding one of a scrappy wildcat. However, Sully knew he was terrified of the old wives' tales of what stalked in the dark. More than once growing up, Arthur had slept with a lit lantern or curled up by the fire after his father or his brothers had teased him with stories. The story of the Scottish banshee from their ancestral homeland gave the boy a particular fright in his youth. So much as hearing a female yell in the distance could set him off. Sully was not so cruel as Arthur's family and friends, so he kept those tales to himself. However, just because he did not speak them aloud did not mean that he was lacking a few yarns of his own to spin on some nights around a fire with the men. Many of the natives who he'd made contact with, such as the Lenape, had their own ghost stories tied to the land itself. These were just tales, however, stories to scare children or fools like Arthur. But Sully was no fool, and was certainly no longer a child. He knew that man only had itself to fear. After a moment, the two picked up their ends of the corpse again. They'd nearly forgotten about it, standing quietly and awkward in the cold as the snowfall became thicker around them. They did not speak now. Arthur was ashamed of himself, and Sully simply having no more to say. At least, having starved to death, this body was not very heavy. It was all they could muster the strength to shuffle about their job at little more than a snail's pace. Their hunger and the cold had cost them both a great deal of sleep. There was no proper burial place near the camp. Sickness was already ravaging the army, and the last thing anyone wanted was to bury the dead too close by. A few soldiers, who had simply withered away from hunger, were elected to be buried deep in the woods, in a small clearing Arthur had found while on patrol. By now, even in the now surprisingly thick snowfall, the two knew their way by heart, and by now the corpse seemed to be growing heavier. It had become easier to let down one's guard in the banal, dismal conditions. In these close quarters, the only thing more familiar than one's fellow soldiers and their grumbling stomachs was the daily monotony of waking up, starving, and trying to sleep. The woods around the camp had long since been harvested to the bone. The animals were virtually gone, and any roots, berries, or even carrion had been inevitably devoured. Vigilant Patriot scouts made sure that no one, not even the stealthiest natives, could penetrate the defenses. A shame, Sully thought to himself, because he would have traded his month's ammunition ration, perhaps even his musket, with a Lenape warrior for a scrawny rabbit or a couple of squirrels. And that's why, when Sully looked past Arthur's shoulder into the clearing, he stopped, dead in his tracks. Just ahead in the pale gloom of the falling snow was a small pile of frozen corpses. The two boys had been working much of the day to prepare them for burial. They'd been wrapped in white linen, which was rapidly blending with the forest floor as snow began to dust the rotting leaves and dirt. This made it stand out even more. Leaning over the pile of bodies was a tall figure completely hidden under a long, cream-coloured coat with a black tri-corner hat atop their head. The coat had been well made, yet was incredibly worn and tattered, covered in dark stains, and the green colour and cuffs all but faded to a washed-out drab. Sully knew that regimental colour was part of no army he knew or had ever faced. Still, he could swear that he'd seen that green and cream-coloured sort of coat somewhere before. The figure seemed to be rummaging through one of the cadavers, having discarded its burial sheet off to the side. What immediately alarmed Sully was that this man was set to be buried without any clothing or possessions, for uniforms were preserved to be given to other recruits that needed them. So, this meant the newcomer was, in fact, not merely interested in pickpocketing the dead. It was clear that this person was interested in the only earthly possession this lost soul had to offer. This revelation sickened Scully to his stomach, and rage began to boil in his blood. Dropping his end of the burden, he swung his musket off his shoulder, raised it to his shoulder, and levelled it in the stranger's direction.
Just what do you think you're doing, friend?
His deep, harsh voice rang across the clearing with an unmistakable echo. The stranger stopped whatever it was doing and was frozen in place.
What are you playing at, Sully?
Arthur, his back still to the scene, glared at Sully in confusion. With a speed that neither of the boys had ever witnessed in a living creature, the figure whipped around to meet them. Sully's weapon began to shake when he noticed the figure had not turned, but rather only its head had somehow twisted around to look him in the face. This had not been an arcing twist or the craning of the neck, reminding Sully of one of the wooden neck hinges from one of his father's puppets. However, this action did not sicken him nearly so much as the face of the figure. If it had once been human, that had clearly long been abandoned or stripped away. The shape of its head clearly matched a human skull, but the skull was almost the sum total of what remained. Whatever flesh that remained hung in thin, desiccated, tattered strands. Bits of it even hung loose like drying lichen. The teeth were jagged, brown, broken with bits of flesh stuck between them,
and the lower jaw was smeared with cold, thick, dark, congealed blood. The eye sockets looked like they'd been long empty, the sightless eyes having perhaps been stolen by carrion birds. In their place, the sockets poured forth a thin trail of what looked like white smoke or mist. The two stood and stared at each other. If what the figure was doing could even be called staring, for what felt like hours. It did not so much as waver or shift position from where it silently considered these two intruders upon its gruesome meal. Even Arthur did not so much as budge, fixated on the absence of colour in his friend's face.
Arthur,
Sully spoke quietly, not sure if he was trying not to be heard by the creature or to mask the quiver in his voice.
when I give the word, throw yourself to the ground.
What the hell is it, Sully? What the devil's behind me?
Damn it all. Just do as you're told. Now.
Everything seemed to happen slowly in Sully's eyes. Arthur began falling to his right-hand side. His finger, rigid with frostbites, curled tighter around the trigger of his brown bess. A cloud, like gunsmoke, slowly curled from his lips as he let out a breath to steady his aim. Arthur's foot lifted some of the rotting leaves from the forest floor into the air. He could see the hammer of the flintlock begin to plunge towards the priming pin. Sparks from the flint drifted into the air like leaves in a breeze. The priming powder slowly began to spark, and then blaze brightly. Sully could swear he saw everything happen at once at that moment. And yet, in the midst of all this movement, not once did he see the figure even twitch. It stayed motionless as a stone. The musket thundered and bucked backward, filling the area with smoke and shattering the deathly silence like a hammer to a crystal glass. Solomon had positioned himself well to handle the recoil, but he did not even notice the weapon's substantial kick. He stood with bated breath, Arthur having twisted to look behind him from where he lay on the forest floor. They stared into the cloud, neither of them sure what to expect. It finally settled and cleared, revealing the figure to be sitting exactly where it had been before. Sully was at a loss for words. He was certain he'd hit it full square, right beneath the left shoulder blade. That's when Arthur raised a trembling finger towards the stranger, pointing to the back of its coat.
Mother of Christ. Sully, look.
Sully's aim had been true, striking the stranger right where his heart should have been, producing a clear hole. However, no blood was coming from the wound at all. This was an injury that should have been spraying that vital fluid across the forest floor, or spreading in a crimson stain upon the coat. Instead, all the two could see was a black, seemingly bottomless hole, from which drifted a wisp of that strange pale smoke. The creature, for it was already clear this was inhuman, was entirely unperturbed.
By God, what are you?
Was all Solomon could bring himself to say. With the hushed utterance of these words, the thing leaped into action, moving like a mere blur. Sully's gut instinct kicked in. Dropping his now useless musket, he threw himself on top of Arthur in a gallant, brotherly action. Draping his larger frame over that of the boy, he braced for the clasp of a cold, dead hand around his neck. Yet, it did not come. When Sully dared to crane his neck and see, the figure had instead taken the corpse by the ankles with its rotting hands. Quickly lugging it out of the clearing, it had already reached the tree line. The corpse had taken 2 boys to carry, yet this monster moved with the strength of 3 large, well-fed men at once. In its hurry to leave, the corner of its great coat had snagged on a protruding root. However, seemingly not noticing, or just ignoring the inconvenience, it merely continued along, and the coat was discarded on the ground. This gave Sully a full view of the horror he had just encountered before it disappeared with its grisly prize forever. It had a human shape, walking on a pair of legs with 2 arms, but it more closely resembled a bedraggled scarecrow. Almost all of its skin and muscle were absent, as if this were a corpse picked clean by vultures, yet miraculously continued to walk afterward. It was almost pathetic to look upon, as if a stiff wind could carry it away. The few shriveled tendons that were left seemed barely sufficient to hold the bones together, never mind provide it with the unearthly strength, speed, and grace with which it moved. There was undoubtedly something incredibly dark and unholy that drove this wretch past the point of death, if it had ever been alive in the first place. All the two boys could do was stare at each other in absolute shock of what they had just witnessed. They were uncertain about what they'd actually seen. They were not sure of when the alerted Patriot sentries had come running to the scene of the gunshot, demanding to know what had happened. They were at a loss what they would say to their commanding officers back in the camp. But one thought was foremost on the two young men's minds. Their appetites and shriveled stomachs had been thoroughly vanquished from the forefront of their minds.
Well, first of all, a massive thank you to all of my dear friends in the narration community who contributed to tonight's Christmas celebration for 2023. Second, of course, and equally as important, if not more, is a big thank you to all of you who've come back here time and again to listen to the stories that I read to you. Wishing you all very happy holidays and a wonderful, prosperous new year. I'll be back again soon, but till then, as always, very, very sweet dreams and bye-bye. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this story today. It really means a lot to me and to the author of the story, of course. Well, if you want to know more about me, I'm pretty much everywhere on social media. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can download my music on SoundCloud. I've got a Patreon if you feel like. Throw me $1 or $2. Very much appreciated. And of course, on Reddit, I have a place where you can leave stories if you want me to read one that you've written. Well, hoping to see you all again very soon. Till then, sweet dreams. Bye-bye.